Hello, my beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to inspire your spirit. And you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. This podcast is a mashup of two of my favorite forms of self-care, connecting with the angels and listening to sleep podcasts, which is what brings us together here and now. My intention is to help co-create a beautiful, sweet, light-filled space where you can rest and drift off if it is your intention to do so. I say it that way because I know that some of you do listen during your waking hours, so I get to keep you company as you go to and from work, or you go about your day. And then I know some of you do listen at bedtime. And I'm a huge fan of sleep podcasts. I listen to one every single night, including this one. So I guess I create this for myself as well. There's something about having that sweet, familiar voice just quietly rambling and meandering a bit in the background that helps my mind, at least, connect to something that is not my day-to-day busy thoughts. And it makes it easier to drift off into that beautiful mystery of sleep. So I invite you to get comfortable in whatever way works best for you. And if you are preparing for bed, I invite you to cozy on up and snuggle on in. And take some nice deep breaths in and out, allowing the love of the angels to come more closely to you. As I record this episode, it is actually the morning time, and the sun is out and the sky is bright blue. And there is a hopefulness in the air that I share with you now. You know, the past few days, and listen, I have no idea when you're going to listen to this, so you could be listening to this a year from now, but hopefully what I'm going to share with you about the past week will be helpful to you. I have found the energy of the past week to be a bit heavy. And what that means for me is that my emotions tend to get ramped up. Just this past weekend, I was saying to my husband that I was feeling very sad. It didn't feel like a personal sadness. You know, I'm pretty self-aware, and so I know if there is something within my consciousness or my life that is causing me to feel sad. This just more felt like a collective sadness, a wave of grief. And then over the coming days, I had friends and clients checking in with me saying, is something up? Feels like Mercury's in retrograde again, or something feels very stuck. something feels very heavy. And I bring this up in our conversations because part of my intention here is to help you build awareness about how your own beingness navigates this world that we are in. It is not uncommon for us to feel waves of energy and not know what they are. We can't always pinpoint the cause. It could be solar flares. I know that might sound weird to some of you. I can't tell you how often I have felt an internal wobble, only to find out there have been some significant geomagnetic storms. Right here on the Earth's plane, we accept that the moon creates shifts sometimes in our emotions. And so it's not unreasonable to think that there are different planetary influences within the collective that we can feel sometimes. So I'm not just sharing this with you so you go, great, what do I do about that? I'm not going to just leave you without some insights about how to navigate these experiences. The first place to begin that I find very, very helpful, if I'm feeling an unexpected wave of something, is if I can gain enough awareness within myself to recognize that something is in flow, right? It's like all of a sudden I'm aware that I'm really sad and nothing has happened to cause that sadness. And so I'll just go within and I'll ask, is this mine? Does this belong to me? And I'll often get a very quick intuitive response, and almost always this is no. The answer is no. Because if I am feeling sad about something, I typically know what I'm sad about. Same thing if I'm feeling anxious, I will know what I'm anxious about. But sometimes when the emotions or the sensations just show up out of nowhere, I try to look at them through this lens. And if I know that it doesn't belong to me, then I just sort of have to wait it out. I don't know how many of you who listen are women, or better to say, people who are born with uteruses and have had a monthly menstrual cycle. But especially when I was younger, I had a horrible time with PMS. My emotions would run so deep. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there is this big-breasted robin outside my window chattering about. So we'll just plug that into the ambient noise category. He has a lot to say this morning, or she does. So when I was younger, I used to ride this emotional roller coaster. It was horrible. It really was very difficult for me, especially when I was a teenager. And I came to learn that any magnification of emotions that I felt during, a certain 7-day period, I needed to just put them on the shelf. And if I still felt that deeply about whatever was going on, then I would seek resolution, or I would go into therapy, or I would talk to someone. And almost always, after those 7 days were completed, I would feel like myself again. And so I often reference that to these waves of energy we have. I think of them as energetic PMS. Not to diminish the experience that so many women have around their cycles. But often these collective waves, we just get through. These waves can also happen when there are cataclysmic events that take place in other parts of the world, which I will not name right now, but there can be a deep sense of fatigue, of sadness, of overwhelm, of anxiousness. So if you're feeling any of these and you suspect that they do not belong to you, just take a deep breath in and let's ask the angels to help recalibrate your energy field, to help you find balance, and to help clear away that which is not yours. So take a deep breath in and release. You know, many of you who listen and who are part of the Illuminating Souls family, many of us, are empaths. In this incarnation, we experience much of life through our hearts and through our emotions. We are those who feel deeply. And this is a blessing, and sometimes it can be challenging. I know for me, it allows me to do this work. I can tune into the love of the angels and share it with you. And I can feel the love that you carry in your heart. And we can meet in the astral realm and these beautiful frequencies of love and light. And we can also sometimes feel these ripples. Yes, in Star Wars, when they say there's a disturbance in the force, or I'll share with you an even stranger movie quote that I love. I don't know how many of you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but when strange things are happening, they go, "Strange things are afoot at the Circle K." I think we have been living through a years-long span of strange things being afoot at the Circle K, my friends. So I don't just say this to you and leave you hanging. We're going to bring the angels in, and we are going to let them wash us clean, help us come into that beautiful ascended light. So again, just get comfortable in your body and breathe. And I'm going to invite the angels in to join us, even though they are already here. So beautiful angels on high, I rejoice in this opportunity to invite you to be here with us now. And even as I say these words, I realize that it is your rejoicing that I feel as you invite us to be here with you now. And so, angels, we join you here with open hearts. Angels, we are so grateful for this opportunity to come together in this beautiful sanctuary filled with divine love. Angels, thank you for the ways you take such good care of us, helping us remember who we are as divine beings in human form. And angels, I ask that you make welcome each of our beloveds here now, helping them to connect with beautiful source energy to help illuminate their light body, helping bringing divine love into their heart chakra, and help them open to the vibrancy that is the truth of their spirit. So, dear ones, just take some nice deep breaths in, and I will share with you what I am seeing in my mind's eye. I see that we are in a beautiful, divine sanctuary, a healing temple, and a vast, beautiful, angelic library of sorts. And it glimmers with golden light. And as we spend time here, it is easier to remember the holiness that each of us embodies. And we are met by angelic guides who greet me with such fondness and familiarity. These are among the angels who have known you since before you were born. They are here now to help balance and calibrate your energy field, to help you heal and reconnect with the inspiration of your heart, to help bring you a deeper sense of vitality and well-being, and to help lift from you anything that feels like a burden, that is too much or feels like too much to carry yourself. I remember once upon a time I had this awareness flow to me that which felt so heavy to me would be light as a feather to them. So, if something feels too heavy for you, ask the angels to carry it in your name, and they will help transform it into light. They can help infuse your situations with more grace. They can help bring to you a sweeter experience of your day-to-day life. It's not that everything will instantly be okay, but connecting with the angels in this way, it's been my experience that it brings more resourcefulness. I somehow can peek my head above the fog and find a way forward. The angels help bring us strength. They help carry us when we feel that we cannot move forward on our own. And when space is available, they help us connect with sparks of inspiration. So I invite you to breathe and allow this beautiful light to come into reunion with you. This light is a part of your divine essence. This light flows to you in service to your highest and best good. So allow it to flow to you. Make space to receive the love that is here for you. And you go ahead and you drift off whenever you are ready. The angels will be with you. And while you rest, I'm going to read you a story. So in this episode, I was guided to return to a very sweet book we have been reading along the past year. which is Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is going to be our 16th episode featuring this book. And one of my favorite parts of reading this book to you is the language that Lucy Maud Montgomery uses. She has written such a delightful character in Anne and her friends and all of Avonlea, which is where Anne lives. So let me give you a little update, especially if you're new to this story. And it's going to be rambling, and I'm not going to get to the point really quick because this is a sleep podcast. So bear with me while I bring you up to speed. So Anne is an orphan, and she is adopted by brother and sister Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. We know that Matthew has recently turned 60, and by this point in the book, I think it's about 3 or 4 years later than that, so he's in his 60s, as is likely Marilla. And they live on Green Gables, which is a farm. And they had thought about adopting a boy that they could give a good home to and who would then help them on the farm because Matthew was getting older. But there was a mix-up in communication, and when Matthew went to pick up the orphaned boy at the train station, it was Anne who was waiting there for him. Now, Anne has red hair that is the bane of her existence. She hates her red hair. She's got freckles. She talks a mile a minute. She's got an enormous imagination, and she is a dreamer and a daydreamer and a storyteller, very dramatic and easy to love. And she gets into all kinds of scrapes and shenanigans, which is a word I think we should have permission to use more frequently in our day-to-day life. If any of you watch Heart of Dixie, you might also have a love of the word shenanigans, but she gets into a lot of those in this book. Her best friend is Diana, who lives at the estate next door. And then there's also the different girls from their school, like Ruby Gillis and Jane Andrews. And at this point in the story, a couple of key things have happened. One is Anne has taken it upon herself to help teach the other girls how to tell stories, and they have created a story club. Because it's so easy for Anne to write stories, and her best friend Diana had said to her, "I don't feel like I have an imagination." And Anne said, "Of course you do. Everyone has one." And so they started this story club, and the last episode we did with this book, it was so funny because Anne was describing about how the other girls write their stories. And one of the things she says about Diana is all the people in Diana's books always die. And Anne says it's because Diana says she doesn't know what to do with them, so she just kills them off. I thought that was so funny. And Anne's stories are worthy of any soap opera or telenovela, with infidelity and tragic death, like all the things an adolescent girl would write about, or at least I would have. I grew up on soap operas, so Anne has a special place in my heart. The other key development that happened was Anne, who I had mentioned, does not like her red hair. A peddler came to town and happened to knock on the door at Green Gables when nobody else was home but Anne, and sold Anne some hair dye that really went wrong. So Anne mistakenly dyed her hair green. This is before having rainbow hair was a super cool thing, Anne thought she was going to have luxurious brown hair, and this dye would not come out. And so they had to cut her hair really short. And she's just recently gone back to school. And, people are accepting her and kind of understand what happens. And now we're getting ready for whatever comes next for Anne and Avonlea and her friends. So we're picking up here in chapter 28. And I need to let you know, I'm impressed that I did that because it's in Roman numerals. And I figured that out before I started reading to you, because even though I'm 60 years old, I still get intimidated by Roman numerals. So I proudly say to you, we are starting at chapter 28. An Unfortunate Lily Maid is the title of this chapter. Of course, you must be Elaine, Anne, said Diana. I could never have the courage to float down here. And you know what? Before we get started, in case you're still awake, there is going to be a little bit of tension in this chapter because Anne does get into a mishap, but it all works out. So don't get nervous. If it seems like Anne's in trouble, she's going to be okay. I just tell you that because it's a sleep podcast and I don't want you to go to bed worrying. So she's going to be okay. So we'll start over. Of course you must be Elaine, Anne, said Diana. I could never have the courage to float down there. Nor I, said Ruby Gillis with a shiver. I don't mind floating down when there's 2 or 3 of us in the flat and we can sit up. It's fun then. But to lie down and pretend I was dead, I just couldn't. I'd really die of fright. Of course it would be romantic, conceded Jane Andrews, but I know I couldn't keep still. I'd be popping up every minute or so to see where I was and if I wasn't drifting too far out. And Anne, that would spoil the effect. But it's so ridiculous to have a red-headed Elaine, mourned Anne. I'm not afraid to float down, and I'd love to be Elaine, but it's ridiculous just the same. Ruby ought to be Elaine because she is so fair and has such lovely long golden hair. Elaine had all her bright hair streaming down, and Elaine was the lily maid. Now a red-headed person cannot be a lily maid. Your complexion is just as fair as Ruby's, said Diana earnestly, and your hair is ever so much darker than it used to be before you cut it. Oh, do you really think so? Exclaimed Anne, flushing sensitively with delight. I've sometimes thought it was myself, but I never dared to ask anyone for fear she would tell me it wasn't. Do you think it could be called auburn now, Diana? Yes, and I think it is real pretty, said Diana, looking admiringly at the short silky curls that clustered over Anne's head and were held in place by a very jaunty black velvet ribbon and bow. And I just have to say, I love the word jaunty. Let's also bring that back into our popular vernacular. Jaunty. They were standing on the bank of the pond below Orchard Slope, where a little headland fringed with birches ran out from the bank. At its tip was a small wooden platform built out into the water for the convenience of fishermen and duck hunters. Ruby and Jane were spending the midsummer afternoon with Diana, and Anne had come over to play with them. Anne and Diana had spent most of their playtime that summer on and about the pond. Idlewild was a thing of the past, Mr. Bell having ruthlessly cut down the little circle of trees in his back pasture in the spring. Anne had sat among the stumps and wept, not without an eye to the romance of it, but she was speedily consoled, for after all, as she and Diana said, big girls of 13 going on 14 were too old for such childish amusements as playhouses, and there were more fascinating sports to be found about the pond. It was splendid to fish for trout over the bridge, and the two girls learned how to row themselves about in the little flat-bottomed dory Mr. Barry kept for duck shooting. It was Anne's idea that they dramatize Elaine. They had studied Tennyson's poem in school the preceding winter, the superintendent of education having prescribed it in the English course for the Prince Edward Island schools. They had analyzed and parsed it and torn it to pieces in general, until it was a wonder there was any meaning at all left in it for them. But at least the fair Lily Maid, and Lancelot and Guinevere and King Arthur had become very real people to them, and Anne was devoured by a secret regret that she had not been born in Camelot. Those days, she said, were so much more romantic than the present. Anne's plan was hailed with enthusiasm. The girls had discovered that if the flat were pushed off from the landing place, it would drift down with the current under the bridge and finally strand itself on another headland lower down, which ran out at a curve in the pond. They'd often gone down like this, and nothing could be more convenient for playing Elaine. "Well, I'll be Elaine," said Anne, yielding reluctantly, for although she would have been delighted to play the principal character, yet her artistic sense demanded fitness for it, and this, she felt, her limitations made impossible. "Ruby, you must be King Arthur, and Jane will be Guinevere, and Diana, you must be Lancelot. But first you must be the brothers and the father. We can't have the old dumb servitor because there isn't room for two in the flat when one is lying down. We must pawl the barge all its length in blackest samite. That old black shawl of your mother's will be just the thing, Diana." The black shawl having been procured, Anne spread it over the flat and then lay down at the bottom with closed eyes and hands folded over her breast. "Oh, she does really look dead," whispered Ruby Gillis nervously, watching the still white little face under the flickering shadows of the birches. "It makes me feel frightened, girls. Do you suppose it's really right to act like this? Mrs. Lynde says that all play acting is abominably wicked." "Ruby, you shouldn't talk about Mrs. Lynde," said Anne severely. "It spoils the effect. This is hundreds of years before Mrs. Lynde was born. Jane, you arrange this. It's silly for Elaine to be talking when she's dead." Anne is such a stickler for authenticity when it comes to pretend. I love that about her. Jane rose to the occasion. Cloth of gold for coverlet there was none, but an old piano scarf of yellow Japanese crepe was an excellent substitute. A white lily was not obtainable just then, but the effect of a tall blue iris placed in one of Anne's folded hands was all that could be desired. "Now she's all ready," said Jane. "We must kiss her quiet brows, and Diana, you say, 'Sister, farewell forever,' and Ruby, you say, 'Farewell, sweet sister,' both of you as sorrowfully as you possibly can. And for goodness sake, smile a little. You know, Elaine, lay as though she smiled. That's better. Now push the flat off." The flat was accordingly pushed off, scraping roughly over an old embedded stake in the process. Diana and Jane and Ruby only waited long enough to see it caught in the current, and headed for the bridge before scampering up through the wood, across the road, and down the lower headland, where as Lancelot and Guinevere and the king, they were to be in readiness to receive the Lily Maid. For a few minutes Anne, drifting slowly down, enjoyed the romance of her situation to the full. Then something happened, not at all romantic. The flat began to leak. In a very few moments it was necessary for Elaine to scramble to her feet, pick up her cloth of gold coverlet, and pall of blackest smite. In a very few moments it was necessary for Elaine to scramble to her feet, pick up her cloth of gold coverlet, and pall of blackest samite, and gaze blankly at a big crack in the bottom of her barge through which the water was literally pouring. That sharp stake at the landing had torn off the strip of batting nailed on the flat. Anne did not know this, but it did not take her long to realize that she was in a dangerous plight. At this rate, the flat would fill and sink long before it could drift to the lower headland. Where were the oars? Left behind at the landing. Anne gave one gasping little scream which nobody ever heard. She was white to the lips, but she did not lose her self-possession. There was one chance, just one. I was horribly frightened, she told Mrs. Allen the next day, and it seemed like years while the flat was drifting down to the bridge and the water rising in it every moment. I prayed, Mrs. Allen, most earnestly I prayed. But I didn't shut my eyes to pray, for I knew the only way God could save me was to let the flat float close enough to one of the bridge piles for me to climb up on it. You know the piles are just old tree trunks, and there are lots of knots and old branch stubs on them. It was proper to pray, but I had to do my part by watching out, and right well I knew it. I just said, "Dear God, please take the flat close to a pile and I'll do the rest," over and over again. Under such circumstances, you don't think much about making a flowery prayer, but mine was answered, for the flat bumped right into a pile for a minute, and I flung the scarf and shawl over my shoulder, and I scrambled up on a big providential stub, and there I was, Mrs. Allen clinging to that slippery old pile with no way of getting up or down. It was a very unromantic position, but I didn't think about that at the time. You don't think much about romance when you have just escaped from a watery grave. I said a grateful prayer at once, and then I gave all my attention to holding on tight, for I knew I should probably have to depend on human aid to get back to dry land. The flat drifted under the bridge and then promptly sank in midstream. Ruby, Jane, and Diana, already awaiting it on the lower headland, saw it disappear before their very eyes, and had not a doubt but that Anne had gone down with it. For a moment they stood still, white as sheets, frozen with horror at the tragedy. Then, shrieking at the tops of their voices, they started on a frantic run up through the woods, never pausing as they crossed the main road to glance the way of the bridge. Anne, clinging desperately to her precarious foothold, saw their flying forms and heard their shrieks. Help would come, but meanwhile her position was a very uncomfortable one. The minutes passed by, each seeming an hour to the unfortunate Lily maid. Why didn't someone come? Where had the girls gone? Suppose they had fainted, one and all. Suppose nobody ever came. Suppose she grew so tired and cramped that she couldn't hold on any longer. Anne looked at the wicked green depths below her, wavering with long, oily shadows, and shivered. Her imagination began to suggest all manner of gruesome possibilities to her. Then, just as she thought she really could not endure the ache in her arms and wrists another moment, Gilbert Blythe came rowing under the bridge in Harmon Andrew's dory. Gilbert glanced up, and much to his amazement, beheld a little white, scornful face looking down upon him with big, frightened, but also scornful gray eyes. "Anne Shirley, how on earth did you get there?" he exclaimed. Without waiting for an answer, he pulled close to the pile and extended his hand. There was no help for it. Anne, clinging to Gilbert Blythe's hand, scrambled down into the dory where she sat, drabbled and furious, in the stern, with her arms full of dripping shawl and wet crepe. It was certainly extremely difficult to be dignified under the circumstances. "What has happened, Anne?" asked Gilbert, taking up his oars. "We were playing Elaine," explained Anne frigidly, without even looking at her rescuer. "And I had to drift down to Camelot in the barge, the flat. The flat began to leak, and I climbed out on the pile. The girls went for help. Will you be kind enough to row me to the landing?" And I should interject here that if you're new to this story, Gilbert Blythe is her nemesis, although he's a really sweet guy and does not know he is her nemesis. It's just that he's very, very smart, and so they are always competing in class. And once upon a time, when Anne was the new girl, he made fun of her red hair, and even though he has apologized, she has never forgiven him. So this is why she is being so cold to him. Gilbert obligingly rowed to the landing, and Anne, disdaining assistance, sprang nimbly on the shore. "I am very obliged to you," she says haughtily as she turns away. But Gilbert had also sprung from the boat and now laid a detaining hand on her arm. "Anne," he said hurriedly, "look here. Can't we be good friends? I am awfully sorry I made fun of your hair that time. I didn't mean to vex you, and I only meant it for a joke. Besides, it's so long ago. I think your hair is awful pretty now. Honest, I do. Let's be friends." For a moment, Anne hesitated. She had an odd, newly awakened consciousness under all her outraged dignity that the half-shy, half-eager expression in Gilbert's hazel eyes was something that was very good to see. Her heart gave a quick, queer little beat, but the bitterness of her old grievance promptly stiffened up her wavering determination. That scene of 2 years before flashed back into her recollection as vividly as if it had taken place yesterday. Gilbert had called her carrots and had brought about her disgrace before the whole school. Her resentment, which to other and older people might be as laughable as its cause, was in no whit allayed and softened by time seemingly. She hated Gilbert Blythe. She would never forgive him. "No," she said coldly. "I shall never be friends with you, Gilbert Blythe, and I don't want to be." "All right," Gilbert sprang into his skiff with an angry color in his cheeks. "I'll never ask you to be friends again, Anne Shirley, and I don't care either." He pulled away with swift, defiant strokes, and Anne went up the steep, ferny little path under the maples. She held her head very high, but she was conscious of an odd feeling of regret. She almost wished she had answered Gilbert differently. Of course, he had insulted her terribly, but still. Altogether, Anne rather thought it would be a relief to sit down and have a good cry. She really was quite unstrung, for the reaction from her fright and cramped clinging was making itself felt. Halfway up the path, she met Jane and Diana rushing back to the pond, in a state narrowly removed from positive frenzy. They had found nobody at Orchard Slope, both Mr. and Mrs. Barry being away. Here Ruby Gillis had succumbed to hysterics and was left to recover from them as best she might, while Jane and Diana flew through the haunted wood and across the brook to Green Gables. There they had found nobody either, for Marilla had gone to Carmody, and Matthew was making hay in the back field. "Oh, Anne," gasped Diana, fairly falling on the former's neck and weeping with relief and delight. "Oh, Anne, we thought you were drowned, and we felt like murderers because we had made you be Elaine, and Ruby is in hysterics. Oh, Anne, how did you escape?" "I climbed up on one of the piles," explained Anne wearily, "and Gilbert Blythe came along in Mr. Andrew's dory and brought me to land." "Oh, Anne, how splendid of him." "Why, it's so romantic," said Jane, finding breath enough for utterance at last. "Of course you'll speak to him after this." "Of course I won't," flashed Anne with a momentary return of her old spirit. "And I don't ever want to hear the word romantic again, Jane Andrews. I am awfully sorry if you were so frightened, girls. It is all my fault. I feel sure I was born under an unlucky star. Everything I do gets me and my dearest friends into a scrape. We've gone and lost your father's flat, Diana, and I have a presentiment that we will not be allowed to row on the pond anymore." Anne's presentiment proved more trustworthy than presentiments are apt to do. Great was the consternation in the Barry and Cuthbert households when the events of the afternoon became known. "Will you ever have any sense, Anne?" groaned Marilla. "Oh, yes, I think I will, Marilla," returned Anne optimistically. A good cry indulged in the grateful solitude of the east gable had soothed her nerves and restored her to her wonted cheerfulness. "I think my prospects of becoming sensible are brighter now than ever." "I don't see how," said Marilla. "Well," explained Anne, "I've learned a new and valuable lesson today. Ever since I came to Green Gables, I've been making mistakes, and each mistake has helped me to cure me of some of my great shortcomings. The affair of the amethyst brooch cured me of meddling with things that didn't belong to me. The haunted wood mistake cured me of letting my imagination run away with me. The liniment cake mistake cured me of carelessness in cooking. Dyeing my hair cured me of vanity. I never think about my hair and nose now, at least very seldom. And today's mistake is going to cure me of being too romantic. I have come to the conclusion that it is no use trying to be romantic in Avonlea. It was probably easy enough in towered Camelot hundreds of years ago, but romance is not appreciated now. I feel quite sure that you will soon see great improvement in me in this respect, Marilla." "I'm sure I hope so," said Marilla skeptically. But Matthew, who had been sitting mutely in his corner, laid a hand on Anne's shoulder when Marilla had gone out. "Don't give up all your romance, Anne," he whispered shyly. "A little bit of it is a good thing. Not too much, of course, but keep a little bit of it, Anne. Keep a little of it." And that brings us to the end of this chapter. So I promised you that Anne would come out of it okay, and she did. So I just love her so much, and I love this book, and I'm so grateful I get to share it with you. And so, my dear friends, we're going to bring this episode to completion. But if you're still wide awake and you want more companionship, there are 130 episodes in the archive. Can you believe that? 130 episodes. I'm so happy that we have all of this content with angel love and stories that I get to share with you. This has become a great joy in my life, and I hope that it is bringing you joy as well. I'm grateful for our time together, and thank you for listening. You delight my heart more than you know. So I wish you the sweetest of dreams. I thank God for the gift of you. I send you blessings of light, and may goodness find you in the coming days. So thank you. We'll connect again soon. I love you.